What's up guys, my name's Stu, and today we are finally talking about the Legendary Valdore Strikewing Escort Warbird. This is one of the ships available in the Legendary First Strike bundle, which also comes with the Legendary Akira. Kind of an odd pairing because these ships really don't have anything to do with each other, though I have in the past kind of criticized Cryptic for sticking too strictly to these kind of ridiculous themes for bundles, so I mean, I really shouldn't complain. Especially because these two ships are actually very nice. I've already talked about the Legendary Akira, so let's get into the Valdore. Here she is, the Legendary Valdore. Kind of like the Legendary Akira, this ship is a bit of a departure from its original Tier 6 specs. Though not as drastically as the Legendary Akira, because they turned that ship from an escort into a cruiser. This is still an escort warbird, but they've changed it into a strikewing escort, meaning it has a hangar bay now. It also has a 5-2 weapons layout plus an experimental weapon, whereas the original Tier 6 Valdore only had a 4-3 weapons layout with an experimental weapon. On those 2 points alone, this thing is already a vast improvement over the original Morrigu. There's actually a third reason why this ship is better than the original Morrigu, because this is a full temporal ship, meaning you're going to have access to recursive shearing 3 and a buttload of unconventional systems triggers. Now, this is the part where I'm going to ask, what is this ship good at? And the answer to that is energy weapons, particularly forward-facing energy weapon builds. The reason this thing is well suited to energy weapons is mostly because it's not well suited to anything else. That's the nice thing with energy weapons. You can throw them on pretty much anything and still get a good amount of performance out of them. Other build types like torpedoes, tanks, EPG, control, supports, any of that kind of stuff, they need much more specific setups. Now that's not to suggest that some ships aren't better than other ships for energy weapons, but they are one of the more versatile build types, and they are very easy to put together on pretty much any kind of ship you can think of. The temporal ship specialization is also very versatile. Technically, it is best suited for science builds because of its focus on exotic damage and control abilities, but these elements also pair really nicely with standard DPS builds like cannon scatter volley or beam overload. The extra control abilities are really good for triggering unconventional systems, and then there's recursive shearing, which is good for virtually any damage build. For the build I'm using on this ship, I went with a cannon scatter volley build using ultimate plasma weapons. I wanted to go with plasma because, you know, Romulans. And I went with ultimate plasma specifically because they have a decent proc on them, having a chance to debuff enemy resistance to plasma energy and kinetic damage. Plus, visually speaking, I think they pair really well with the Romulans because they're a bright green energy weapon. Also, I like the pew-pew sound effects of the cannons. But they also visually pair really well with the Ultimate Plasma set from the Low-Buy store, which I am also using on the ship because, frankly, you really want to be using that with any plasma build. This set is a bit expensive because it is low-buy gear, and you're going to want the full 3-piece set, but this is also the set that put plasma back on the map. Its 2-piece bonus is Plasma Saturation Bombardment. Every time you land a critical hit or if you miss a shot, your ship will fire a plasma bolt at your target that will deal a small amount of plasma damage, and can fire up to 2 of these per second. It's basically a weak experimental weapon that doesn't take up an extra slot. Though its 3-piece bonus is the really nice part, Starfleet Ultimate Hybrid Arms. This is a click ability that will give a 100% fire recycle haste buff to your weapons for 12 seconds. It does have a 2-minute recharge, and because it's a set bonus, there is no way to reduce that 2-minute recharge time. But 12 seconds is still a good amount of uptime for an ability like this, and a 100% firing cycle haste buff? That's incredible. So yeah, Ultimate Plasma set. I'm a fan. I did say this was an energy weapon, so a lot of the rest of this is going to be your standard energy weapon setup. We got the Colony Deflector, the Competitive Engines, the Discovery Reputation Shield. The Singularity Core is an Elite Fleet Throw-on-Infused Singularity Core. This is basically the Singularity Core counterpart to the Spire Warp Cores that I usually use on energy weapon builds, and is also available on the Fleet Spire. None of the older versions of the Valdore included a unique experimental weapon, so of course the Legendary version didn't include one either. So I just stuck Soliton Wave Impeller on it because it is usually the best one. That said, you can get away with whatever experimental weapon you prefer. The devices, as always, are my usual setup. So, energy amplifiers, deuterium surplus, reactive armor catalyst, and the Kobayashi Maru transponder. We've got Lorca's custom fire control down here in the consoles, because of course we do. All that crit chance and shield pen is just too good to pass up on. Now, because I'm using the Ultimate Plasma set, which does include a torpedo, I am not using the Dark Matter torpedo. And there's no plasma version of the dual heavy beam bank, so I am not getting the set bonus out of this thing. However, I know some people still want to get at least the 2-piece bonus out of the Lorca set for that stacking crit severity buff. So what those people would do is move the Ultimate Torpedo to the back, replacing the turret, because you need the Omni to maintain the Ultimate set, and then just put the Dark Matter Torpedo in the front, because it is a more powerful torpedo, and you'll also gain that stacking crit severity buff from the Lorca 2-piece. I didn't want to do that here, I wanted to stick with all plasma for the Romulan theme, but that is an option you can certainly take. I've also got Bioneural Infusion Circuits for the crit severity, the DPRM and the Domino for their click ability. Sensor Suspension Burst is also here to help out my pets and for the extra crit chance. And there's the Ultimate Modified Swarm Processor, which is mainly here for its part in the Ultimate set, but also because it has a really nice crit chance buff. And in the tactical consoles are, as usual, a bunch of vulnerability locators and exploiters. The last console here is the Chronogami Displacer. This console is the prize for the current First Contact Day event. I put it on this build because for some reason Cryptic decided to give it a set bonus with the new hanger pets that this ship comes with, the Temporal Ops Scorpion Fighter Squadron. When equipped together, your Temporal Scorpions will apply 2 stacks of entropy to foes whenever they're hit, and will gain a 20% bonus damage buff. That's a pretty nice buff for these Scorpion fighters. The 20% bonus damage, that just speaks for itself, and the extra entropy generation is going to pair really nicely with the temporal seating on the ship. The console itself isn't super impressive, but it is rather amusing. Applying it to a target will open up a Chronogami portal next to it, and a future version of that ship will come out of the portal just before its destruction, and then explode, hitting your target. It's basically the console version of stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. Additionally, destroying a battleship, dreadnought, or boss will reduce the recharge time of the Chronogami console to its minimal value. So depending on what sort of environment you're in and how quickly you're killing your enemies, you're going to get a good amount of recharge time out of this console, which means you're going to be able to activate it that much more. When this console was first announced, I initially criticized it for its damage not being tied into your EPG skill, but I was talking to a friend about this console and he thinks that its ability to lower its recharge time so drastically is why they didn't tie it into EPG. And really, that does make sense. So while that means this probably won't be a meta console, it is at least going to be one that you can have a lot of fun with because you're going to be able to activate it that much more. And like I said, its set bonus is pretty nice, so if you're using those new Temporal Scorpion fighters, definitely something you want to have. Which does make it a shame that the Chronogami Displacer is event gear, because it's only going to be available for free for a limited time. If you don't have a chance to complete this year's First Contact Day event, this console is going to disappear for likely 2 to 3 years, only to reappear in Mud's Market. And once it's in Mud's, it's going to be ludicrously expensive. Including event gear as part of console sets is something Cryptic used to do a long time ago. Cryptic used to release 3 packs of Tier 6 ships, but would have a 4-piece console set. The 4th console would always be on an event ship. The Flagship Technology set is a perfect example. 3 of those consoles are available on the Yorktown, Endeavor, and Sojourner Star Cruisers, also their Klingon and Romulan variants and their legendary versions. But that console set is a 4-piece set, the last one being available on the Krenum Science Vessel, which was the prize for the 6th anniversary event. This wasn't quite as big of a deal once the Phoenix Store came out because there was still a free option for you to get that past event gear, but these days event gear never goes into the Phoenix Store, it always goes into Mud's Market. Like, I understand Cryptic wanting to give you an incentive to use the Chronogami on the Legendary Valdore, because both played a major part in Crisis Point 2 on Star Trek Lower Decks, but once this event is over and people start realizing they missed out on a valuable set bonus because it was an event, they're not going to be happy, and I would think that Cryptic would know that at this point. Honestly, the Chronogami console should have just been part of the Legendary bundle. It makes way more sense than a lot of the other extras they put in there. Anyway, enough ranting about that. I should probably talk about the new Scorpion fighters. I talked plenty about their set bonus, but didn't really talk about them themselves. Like the new command-integrated Kodai fighter squadrons introduced with the Legendary Akira, these Temporal Ops Scorpion fighters are another specialization-integrated fighter. They trade off a little bit of weapons damage, and in exchange they will gain the ability to apply entropy to enemy targets. And like I said earlier, if you have the 2-piece bonus with the console, that is increased to 2 stacks of entropy. The idea is to give you an easier way to apply entropy to enemy targets so you can then rip it away with your own temporal seating, which will result in physical damage being dealt to that target. The more entropy stacks that a target has, the more physical damage they'll receive when it's consumed. Now, while this is an interesting interaction, really it's not going to do all that much damage on a ship like this, by which I mean an escort ship, which are typically more weapons focused. Physical damage is a form of exotic damage, so really these would pair really well on a science vessel. More specifically, a multi-mission science vessel that is also a temporal ship, or at least has temporal seating. Ooh, actually a science dreadnought too, because those also have a hangar bay. Sadly, there aren't many multi-mission science vessels that are also temporal ships in the game, and even fewer science dreadnoughts. In fact, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is the Eternal, and fortunately that's at least a C-Store ship. So yeah, interesting pets, but there aren't a lot of options in order to get the most out of them. At least not currently. Okay, moving on to the traits. The personal traits are my pretty standard setup for an energy weapon build. Some notable differences from what I usually use. First is a good day to die. Normally I do these build videos on my engineering character, so you don't often see this personal trait on my videos. But I'm doing this build on my tactical character, which is why a good day to die is here, because that is a must-have personal trait for any tactical players. I'm also using Independent Wingmate on here to further help out the Scorpion fighters. I usually like to use this whenever I'm using a ship with a hangar bay. but the rest of these are standard for pretty much all of my energy weapon builds, so I'm not going to go over them. But if you're new here, or if you just don't want to go back and look at one of my older videos, I will leave all of the personal traits listed on the screen so you can know what's what. Now the starship traits. Again, a lot of this is pretty standard for a lot of my energy weapon builds. We've got Calm Before the Storm, Emergency Weapon Cycle, and Overpowered and Overgun, all of which are here for their haste buffs. The latter two also reduce my weapons power cost. Pride of Malrihan also gives a firing cycle haste buff, and gives a small bonus damage buff to plasma damage on top of that. It's also only triggered by attack pattern beta and temporal operative abilities, so it actually fits pretty nicely on this ship. Next is Superior Air Denial, which will allow my fighter pets to use Scatter Volley every time I use Scatter Volley, which means they'll be spreading around entropy that much more easily. And finally, Withering Barrage to extend the duration of Cannon Scatter Volley by 4 seconds, which should be obvious because this is a Cannon Scatter Volley build. In the reputation traits, first is Advanced Targeting Systems for the crit severity, Precision and Tyler's Duality for the crit chance, Magnified Firepower for the bonus damage, and Controlled Countermeasures for the extra bonus damage against controlled enemies. Now, moving on to the Bridge Officer seating. I've talked quite a bit on how this is a full temporal ship, so obviously it's going to have a commander level temporal seat, which is right here on this tactical seat. But the Legendary Valdore also has a secondary lieutenant commander level pilot seat, which is right here on this universal seat, which I am using as a science seat. This pilot seat is actually really nice because it feeds into one of the other strengths of this starship, the amount of unconventional systems triggers you can fit on it. Since pilot seating was revamped, Clean Getaway now triggers unconventional systems. It's actually a really good unconventional trigger because of its low minimal cooldown. So on this seat, I've got Tractor Beam, Clean Getaway, and Gravity Well, Heisenberg Amplifier, Chronometric Inversion Field, and Timeline Collapse on the temporal seat, Emit Unstable Warp Bubble on the engineering seat, and Jam Targeting Sensors and Scramble Sensors on the science seat. That is 9 total unconventional systems triggers. That is absolutely incredible. Though honestly, I'm going to bump it down to 8 after this video because I have sacrificed Recursive Shearing for one of these triggers, but even then, that is a lot of unconventional systems triggers. Most ships are lucky if they can fit 5. But yeah, with that many abilities triggering that personal trait, lowering the cooldowns of your universal consoles is not going to be a problem. The rest of it is pretty straightforward. I've got Scatter Volley 3 for my cannons. Of course, if you're using beams, you'll want to switch that up to Beam Overload or Fire at Will, which will actually take the spot in the Lieutenant Commander seat, which means you'll actually have room for Recursive Shearing 3. I'm sick of single target builds and I didn't feel like playing around with entwined tactical matrices, so I went with Scatter Volley. In the Lieutenant level tactical seat, we've got Torpedo Spread 1 to buff my torpedo, and Chemosite Lace Weaponry 2 to get some extra radiation damage on my weapons. And over here is Emergency Powered Weapons to trigger Emergency Weapon Cycle and Overpowered and Overgunned. It also buffs my energy weapon damage, which is nice, but it's mainly there for the traits. And my duty officers are my normal assortment of Borg Doffs and projectile officers for buffing crit chance and severity. So out of the First Strike Legendary bundle, the Legendary Akira really kind of stole the show just due to the fact that it's an Akira, and that they actually made it a command ship so it can be a proper torpedo build. But I feel like a lot of people just kind of overlooked the Legendary Valdore, because frankly, this is a fantastic ship. Its stats are certainly different from the Legendary Akira, which, I mean, that's kind of a good thing. You don't want both ships to be the same, that's just boring. And this ship isn't quite as versatile, the Legendary Akira being good for both torpedoes and energy weapons, whereas this is really only good for forward-facing energy weapon builds. This ship is still fantastic, because what it can do, it does very well. Because not only is it good for energy weapons, but it also mixes in a nice amount of exotic focus as well because of the temporal seating and because of those fighters. Honestly, I don't really have any complaints about this ship. It has a good weapons layout, it has great bridge officer seating, it's a full temporal ship with a secondary pilot seat, plus it's gorgeous. The Valdore has always been a very visually striking ship. It's very thin and sleek, but it also has that huge wingspan. But not only was the Mogai skin recently revamped shortly before the release of this legendary bundle, but the legendary skin of the ship is inspired by the Romulus ship as seen in Crisis Point 2 in Star Trek Lower Decks. So not only is this ship gorgeous, but it can also be a Lower Deck ship, and I am always happy to see more Lower Decks content in Star Trek Online. The only complaint I really do have is about the Chronogami console, which is also Lower Decks content, but the fact that they gave it a set bonus while also being event gear, I don't like that. I thought Cryptic had moved on from those sort of releases. It's kind of disappointing to see them doing this again. Because while it's not that big of a deal for me, because obviously I already have the console because I did the event, but I just feel sorry for anyone who misses out on the event, because then they're going to be short this console set. Because once this event is over, we all know where this console is going. And we all know it's not going to be the Phoenix store. Not anymore. Oh, I'm dumb. I forgot to talk about the trait and consoles. Being a legendary version of the Valdore, this thing comes with all the consoles from the older versions of the Valdore. That's the Enhanced Weapon Systems Efficiency set, which includes Ablative Hazard Shielding, Ionized Particle Beam, and Shield Absorbative Frequency Generator. I'm just realizing that the name of this console set, Enhanced Weapon System Efficiency, makes no sense because 2 of the 3 consoles are shield focused, and the 3rd one deals exotic damage. Weird. Anyway, the first 2 consoles really aren't anything special. The first one is a heal console. It'll absorb damage for 45 seconds, and when that time expires, it'll give you some hit points and some shield regeneration. The other one is Ionized Particle Beam, which just fires a beam of electrical damage at an enemy target. It has a chance to become a Super Ionized Particle Beam, which lasts for 12 seconds. Frankly, that should just be the console. I don't know why they have to give it a 3% chance of being useful. But the one to talk about is Shield Absorptive Frequency Generator. While this console is equipped, when your shields go below 90% on any shield pacing, you have a 2.5% chance per shot of all your energy weapons to restore shields for 200% of your outgoing damage of that one shot. At 2.5%, that's basically a weapons proc, and it can trigger off of any of your energy weapons. So if you're using something like Scatter Volley or Fire at Will, coupled with a good amount of haste buffs, that is a lot of potential shield regeneration. You know how I've always said that shield tanking really isn't a viable thing in Star Trek Online, because it takes too much effort to build into and it's just not worth it? This console is likely going to change that, because with the release of this legendary ship, this console set has been unbound from the variations of the Valdore. So this can be used on any ship, and it is definitely something you're going to want on a tank build. Even if you're not running a tank build, if you just want some extra survivability, this is a good, cheap console to get, because you don't actually have to own the Legendary Valdore to own this console. This console originally comes from the Tier 3 Valdore Heavy Warbird, which means if you don't already own it, you can buy that ship and its console for 7,500 dilithium. The Legendary Valdore also comes with 2 starship traits. The Legacy trait is Emergency Weapon Cycle. This is probably one of the most commonly used starship traits in Star Trek Online. If you ask any player in Star Trek Online what is a must-have starship trait, a lot of them are going to say Emergency Weapon Cycle. The only downside of it being on the Legendary Valdore is that a lot of people who bought the Legendary Valdore probably already have this starship trait. The new Legendary trait it comes with is called Temporal Replication. Whenever you use a temporal ability that consumes entropy or just a commander-level bridge officer ability, you have a 20% chance per entropy stack on your enemy target to apply one of the following abilities: Timeline Collapse 1, Rapid Decay 1, or Gravimetric Conversion 1. The starship trait is basically like, yo dog, we heard you like temporal abilities, so we put temporal abilities inside your temporal abilities. Much like the fighters this ship comes with, this ship is really going to be better suited to something that is a full temporal science ship. Something that's going to get the most out of the physical damage out of that consumed entropy. So yeah, that is the Legendary Valdore. Like I said, I'm really happy with this ship. It's not quite as versatile as, say, the Legendary Akira, but what it can do, it is very good at. What did you guys think of the Legendary Valdore? Did you like it? Were you not impressed with it? Would you prefer something else? Let me know it in the comments down below. While you're down there, be sure to hit like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button to become a member and get various bonuses to the channel, or you can hit the super thanks button, or you can find the link to the merch store in the video's description. If you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701 when you're checking out. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does help out the channel, and I really do appreciate it, so that's code STU1701. Don't forget, Star Trek Resurgence comes out on May 23rd, and that is an Epic exclusive on PC. But yeah, either way, thank you so much for watching the video. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.